welcome to the Ghosts of Harrenhal. My name's Simon.
And I'm Mackelly.
Thank you for joining us for episode 110 of our chapter-by-chapter book review of the A Song of Ice and Fire series by George Martin. Today we'll be discussing chapter 36 of A Clash of Kings, that's Tyrion 8.
And as always, we're going to chat about the chapter and try not to spoil any future plot points for you. And hopefully, we'll provide you some entertainment along the way.
We'll summarise what happened, discuss our thoughts on it, provide some useful background, compare it to the television show, indulge in a little pedantry, and cover some reader correspondence. Be sure to check out the show notes. They'll help you, particularly if you're not reading along. How are you?
I'm doing all right. We've had some technical difficulties this morning, so hopefully this time it'll take.
Yes. Listeners may be aware of our technical difficulties by this point.
If you hear every third word Simon says, then the technical difficulties have not subsided. But anyway, how are you?
I'm good. I'm trying to learn how to code in Python.
Oh,
cool. I'm a lifetime learner.
Yes, you are. That's a pretty neat thing to do, learn to code.
Perhaps the audience didn't see me roll my eyes as I said those words. But I created a script the other day I have to do something on a regular basis. Basically add a row to a table in an HTML file and then change another row. So it's not terribly complicated, but there's a little bit of logic has to go into it. And it took me about 3-4 hours to write this script, and I showed it off to Carson and showed her what happened. And she was really impressed, let me tell you.
Ooh, looky there.
I said, well, learning Python's a good thing to have in my toolkit.
Right, yeah.
And she said, honey, if that took you 4 hours, I don't think you can say you've got it in your toolkit yet.
At the moment, you'll get faster and better as it goes. Well, that's pretty neat, though. A lot of people could use learning Python. I think that's a pretty useful thing. Maybe I'll pick it up as well.
Yeah, it's handy for that kind of thing. For something that you have to do on a regular basis,
Yeah.
You just click a button instead of doing it all.
Right. Yeah. Cool. Good stuff.
But Carson brings me back down to earth.
That's what wives are supposed to do, I guess, right?
Yeah.
I've been this past week listening to a podcast that is 15 years old, and it got me wondering as they make references to things that happened back in the early 2000s. It got me wondering if people will still be listening to us in 15 years' time.
Yeah.
And I figured as well. I figured as well, mostly because they'll still be waiting for Winds of Winter. So they'll just be killing time.
That's right. Yeah. 10 years from now, Winds of Winter will come out and everyone will re-listen to all this.
Right, yeah.
We'll be up to speed by then.
Anyway.
All right, we've got a long chapter, so let's
do.
get down to business. How do we leave Tyrion? Last time we saw Tyrion, he was receiving a late-night visit from his cousin Lancel Lannister. Lancel, as a proxy for the Queen, was demanding the release of Grandmaster Pycelle from the dungeon and the arrest of Sir Jacelyn Bywater for not releasing Grandmaster Pycelle. Lancel's haughty nature came crashing down when Tyrion threatened to reveal to Joffrey Lancel's part in the murder of Joffrey's father, King Robert, and his now relationship with the Queen. To keep Tyrion quiet, Lancel agreed to spy on Cersei for Tyrion. Later, Tyrion visited Shae and acknowledged to himself the fact that he was in love with her. Mackelly, why don't we give the summary of this one?
All right. What's left of Joffrey's small council gathers to discuss the news coming from Renly's camp. The rumors Varys is hearing of who's responsible for Renly's death vary greatly, ranging from a member of his own Rainbow Guard, to a spurned woman, to a camp follower sent to please him, to the Lady Catelyn Stark, of all people. But they all agree on one thing. Renly Baratheon is dead.
Queen Cersei's had enough of rumours, she wants truths, and if Lord Varys utters another unsubstantiated rumour, she'll make the small council even smaller. The idea of Renly's death being a ruse is quickly discounted. Tyrion figures, regardless of who did the deed, Stannis was surely behind it. He's got the most to gain from his brother's death. It's a setback to Tyrion's plans. He had counted on a long, bloody battle between the brothers.
So the question now is, where do allegiances lie within Renly's followers? Varys says most of the foot soldiers are back at Bitterbridge, but the majority of the lords who rode to Storm's End with Renly have bent the knee to Stannis. Tyrion points out that Most of the lords have pledged fealty to Stannis, but not all, and Varys concedes the point. A fifth of the lords rode out with Ser Loras Tyrell rather than back Stannis. He adds that, in fact, not even Storm's End has joined Stannis. Storm's End castellan Courtney Penrose refuses to yield until he sees Renly's body, and his body seems to have gone missing.
Varys mentions that when Ser Loras saw Renly's body, he lost control and killed 3 members of the Rainbow Guard, including Sirs Aemon Qui and Robar Royce. Tyrion realizes Loras is the answer to their problems. Win him to their side, and many others will follow, including Loras's powerful father, Mace Tyrell. The question is, how to win the Tyrells to their side. Few ideas are floated before Tyrion hits on the winner. Marriage.
Make Margaery Tyrell a queen. Again. Wed her to Joffrey. Cersei points out that Joff is already betrothed to Sansa Stark, but the 3 men bombard her with reasons why this match is not only better suited, but also so much more advantageous. When talks turn toward Joff bedding Margaery, Cersei thinks he's too young for that. But Tyrion remembers a recent conversation with Varys about possibly sneaking Joff into Chataya's brothel, but the war news has tabled that idea for the moment.
When Cersei acquiesces to the marriage plan, the next point of contention is who should go to make the proposals to the Tyrells. Cersei suggests Jacelyn Bywater to command of the Gold Cloaks, and then Tyrion himself, when Bywater is rejected. Tyrion turns the tables and thinks it makes most sense for Joffrey's mother to handle such wedding plans. Littlefinger stops the squabbling by suggesting he be sent. He's on the small council, but not worthy of being taken as hostage. He knows Ser Loras, and he fancies himself quite the negotiator.
Reluctantly, Tyrion sees the logic in the plan. Littlefinger Littlefinger thinks to have the Redwine twins with him as a show of goodwill, since the Redwines and Tyrells are very close. Cersei balks at the idea. She wants the Redwine fleet and swords, and there's no better way to get them than to keep the twins under her thumb. Tyrion breaks the tie. Hobart goes, Horace stays in King's Landing. After Littlefinger does some negotiations regarding the logistics of the trip, the breadth of his abilities to make decisions on the king's behalf, and his compensation for this effort, he takes his leave.
As Tyrion and Cersei take their leave together, Cersei asks after Tyrion's massive chain. The Queen then admits to having misjudged her younger brother. He's actually proven very helpful to her, and she asks for forgiveness for her behaviour towards him. In a shocking move, Cersei bends and kisses Tyrion on the cheek and walks away. A stunned Tyrion can hardly believe the scene was real. Bronn thinks Cersei has finally come around to appreciate Tyrion, but Tyrion has a different interpretation. She's planning something, and he needs to figure out what.
It's probably a good idea.
Yeah.
Their chess match continues between the 2 siblings here.
Yes.
Yeah.
Although maybe not a chess match again. There seems to be some contention on what game they're playing.
Right. Syvas match, maybe.
Yes, Syvas, yes.
So it's not good news for those in King's Landing.
Well, it is good news for the Lannisters because Renly's dead, and he was a rival.
Yes, you're right.
That news is good.
Yes.
But that's a silver lining to a big dark cloud.
Yes, the bad news is that they were, especially Tyrion, was planning on the Baratheons having a long, bloody battle, and this has cut it short. But quite honestly, I'm not sure that thought made a whole lot of sense. If he is aware of the disparity in numbers, I mean, if Renly didn't die this way, the battle was still likely to end that day when Renly's forces likely smashed Stannis' to bits.
Yeah, but the bloody part would have happened.
True.
At least it would have been a smaller combined force than it is now. With only 1 death, that remains a very large force.
True. Although Renly already has a rather large force, so it would have been very minimal casualties at best.
Well, no, I mean, if you think if it's man for man and they fight to the last man in Stannis' things, then what Stannis had 5,000, 4,000?
Right. Yeah, something
so
like that.
That would be 8,000 dead. So
would have dropped Renly's forces to just over 90,000-ish.
Right, but you know what? I'd rather face 90,000 than 100,000.
Yes, that's true. The numbers add up there. That's true.
Yeah. So Tyrion is very grateful. I mean, it all feels like it's falling into place for Stannis, but one thing that's working against it is, well, there's two things working against it. One is Loras' departure with some of the lords, and the other one is that Courtney Penrose is withholding Storm's End from Stannis, which is a bit weird, to be honest. I mean, I don't know how many of the lords of the Stormlands and the Reach have to come to the walls and shout, "No, really, he's dead," before you believe it.
Right. Yeah, especially if Varys said that 4/5 of the lords that were with Renly have now bent the knee to Stannis. You'd think he'd be like, "Oh, okay. Yeah. That doesn't seem like that would happen in a vacuum."
Right, and not only that, but he should never have locked the doors to Stannis. Stannis is the eldest Baratheon brother. It's a little bit weird that he didn't at least invite him in.
Right.
I mean,
yeah, maybe keep his forces out, but
it is strange that the body's gone missing.
It is. It is a strange thing.
I guess it was a chaotic situation, though.
Yeah, but so Tyrion thinks that it's a blessing that Courtney Penrose is holding Storm's End from Stannis, but you gotta wonder, first of all, how long that will hold up. Like we were just saying, that can't go on for very long, because he is the rightful lord. Right.
Yes, a siege of Storm's End could take forever, but convincing Courtney Penrose to open the doors shouldn't take more than a couple of days.
Right. And Tyrion says that Stannis is not going to march on King's Landing until he's not going to leave Storm's End still untaken and a march on King's Landing. And I was wondering why it matters. Take the Iron Throne and Storm's End will fall into place. If you're now the king of...
Right. When Stannis assumes the Iron Throne, Courtney Penrose is going to be, where the hell is Renly?
I've been waiting around all week.
Maybe he is dead.
That very well might be exactly how his thought process goes.
It's not like Courtney Penrose is going to sneak out of Storm's End and chase them.
Right. Yeah, I didn't see the logic there when he thought.
Yeah.
By the way, Penny is going crazy upstairs. I hope it's not picking up too badly on the audio.
I can't hear it. And my pause earlier was because some huge truck went by, and I could see it was being picked up by the audio, so I waited till it went by. So yeah, there's obviously chaos after Renly's death.
We expected that.
Yes, absolutely. And not all of them went over to Stannis, which is pretty much what you'd expect. Most of them would, because basically these people are saying the Baratheons are the kings, the Lannisters on the thrones are not Baratheons,
right?
And therefore I support the Baratheon claim. Now there's only one left. Okay, that's the one I support.
Yeah. Which is different than what Kat thought. Kat thought they were all going to go over at the end of her last chapter.
Yeah, but there was always going to be a faction, especially because of Renly's murder. There was always going to be a faction that sort of rebelled against this.
Right.
And Loras Tyrell was the natural fulcrum of this. But it is interesting to me that as many as 20% joined Loras's sort of rebellion against the rebellion.
Yes.
Because it's hard to know what their end game is. Well, anyway, we'll get to that a little bit more. But one thing I want to mention actually here is that this army of Renly's is really only their knights. The foot soldiers still aren't there.
Right.
So I did wonder if Loras is riding away from this army, he's going to bump back into the foot soldiers.
Right. Yeah, they assume he's riding to Bitterbridge, which is where the majority of the foot soldiers are.
Yeah. Well, they're not camped there. They're supposed to be marching towards Storm's End, aren't they? I mean, to catch up. I thought that was the plan.
I thought that was the plan too, but according to what Varys said in this chapter, the majority of the foot are still at Bitterbridge. So maybe they turned around and went back after they heard news.
Anyway, it feels natural that Loras is going to bump into them.
Right.
And then you'd imagine it'd be hard to just sort of trot on by without saying hello.
You think, yes.
So then you have a conversation with them, and Loras could steal this army. He could steal this entire army.
Sure, that's possible. I guess it depends on if these soldiers... You would think that 4/5 of these soldiers have allegiance to lords who have now backed Stannis.
Right.
But of course,
But
yeah, I think I know where you're going. Go ahead.
Loras Tyrell is, from the Tyrells, the Lord Paramount of the Reach.
Right, yes. Yes.
And so if he says, you're coming with me, then even if they have a fealty to a Lord of the Reach who has pledged fealty to Stannis, they're going to do what they're told.
Yes, yeah, that
less so for Baratheons.
Right.
But you could perhaps convince the Baratheon loyalists to say, Stannis murdered Renly, don't join with him.
Yeah, you make some sense there. You, like, take the Florence, for example. They were the first house to come over because Selyse Baratheon, Stannis' wife, was Selyse Florent before she married Stannis. They're a Reach family, and so their soldiers might still be there at Bitterbridge. And what do they do if the son of the Lord Paramount of the Reach says, no, you're coming with me, you're not backing your lord? That's a bit of a conflict of allegiances there. Yep.
And of course, nobody at Bitterbridge will know who has pledged allegiance to Stannis, apart from by their absence in Loras's entourage.
Right, yes. Good point. Yeah, if you don't see your lord riding with Renly, then you know that he's backed Stannis, I guess. But, yeah, so like I just made reference to, Littlefinger guesses that the Florents were the first to bend the knee, and he is correct. Alistair is the current lord of the Florents, and he is Selyse's uncle. Now, her other uncle, Axel, is already with Stannis on Dragonstone. He had a conversation
Selyse being
with...
Stannis' wife, right?
What's...
Just as a reminder.
What's
Selyse
that?
Being Stannis' wife.
Yes, Selyse being Stannis' wife, yes. Yeah, Axel was on Dragonstone with Stannis. Davos had a conversation with him in the last Davos chapter. Yeah, so Alistair is the Lord of Brightwater Keep, and he had backed his liege lord, the Tyrells, and supported Renly, unlike his younger brother Axel, who backed Stannis and Selyse. So now the Florents are all on board under one umbrella, that is Stannis.
Yeah. Yeah. Which was, I mean, they were always in a difficult position, the Florents, because
right.
Their liege lord was on one side and their daughter was on the other side, so...
Yes, that's that was tricky for them. Now it's all sorted out. All the family is together again.
Yeah. So Loras didn't take the news of Renly's death very well.
No, he sure didn't.
No, he killed Emmon Quee and Robar Royce. Rough on Robar. Although Robar did help Cat and Brienne escape, so perhaps Loras blamed him,
Yeah.
They did it, you helped them escape.
Right. I guess it does make some sense. Ser Emmon and Robar were the two that were there when Renly died and allowed Brienne and Cat to escape. I just wonder if Robar got to tell Loras what Cat said to him about the Stannis shadow assassin, or if Loras didn't even want to hear it and killed him without even, listening to what he had to say.
Yeah.
But
it doesn't make an awful lot of difference. Loras blames Stannis, whoever did it.
Right, yeah. But it's also poor Jon Royce, Bronze Jon. He's lost now two of his three sons. He lost Sir Waymar in the prologue of A Game of Thrones.
Oh, yeah.
And now he's lost his second son, Robar. So he's really only got Andar, his eldest, left. And I wonder if he's going to wrap him in bubble wrap, keep him safe.
The Hornwoods would say, well, we've got it worse than you.
True.
If there were any left to say it.
Yes, so that's a good point.
It is an odd development that the body's gone missing. It's possible Loras took it with him to put it in state somewhere.
That was what I thought. I mean, nothing else makes a whole lot of sense. Loras rode out. Loras was closest to Renly. So it would stand to reason that he might have... If the body's gone missing, my first guess would be, let's check with Loras to see if he took the body with him.
sort of weekend at Bernie's thing going on.
They've got him propped up on his horse.
So when they intercept the army at Bitterbridge, they fake that they're Renly.
Your king lives!
Don't listen to what Stannis says.
Yeah, just put a helmet on him,
He's duped 80% of the lords, but you know better.
Yeah, I mean, they put that big antlered helmet on anybody. They'll believe that it's, oh my gosh, my dog is going insane up there.
I honestly can't hear it. So the whole thing then leads to sort of like the big strategic thing, which is now that the Tyrells have broken from Stannis' ranks, there is the opportunity for the Lannisters to try to woo them some way. And
right.
So if you think about who's holding out, now the Tyrells they were very much Team Baratheon.
Right.
The Red Wines because of the captive twins, and the Tarleys are the sort of third major house that sided with Loras here. And I think that's just because Sam's father is just a contrarian. I don't think why he would do this. I mean,
Sir Mathis Rowan is also listed as
yes, that's right.
holdout.
Rowan, yeah. I do get from Loras's perspective here. His friend was murdered by the command of Stannis, if not by his hand. But I don't really get what's in it for the others. Eventually, you've got to pick a team. You've got to pick a side. The only people vying for the throne at the moment are Stannis, Joffrey, and Robb.
Right.
You have the least beef with Robb Stark, unless Cat murdered Renly, of course, which is possible. Or at least in your mind, it's possible. We know that's not what happened, but they weren't witnesses to it. So
right.
But we don't think Robb's got any interest in the Iron Throne. Or does he? I mean, maybe that's where this goes in the long run. Maybe Robb Stark.
Robert Baratheon didn't necessarily have designs on a throne either when he rebelled.
Yeah. So realistically, this gang of rebels from the rebellion,
right,
have to pick a side, and the choice is Joffrey or Stannis. And I mean, fratricide's awful and everything, but it's nothing compared to Joffrey's face.
Those pouty lips, you just want to
exactly.
punch him. Yeah, I get your point. I wonder if maybe it's going to come down to a split between the Reach and the Stormland Lords. The Stormland Lords more likely to back Stannis, and the Reach being the group that's up for grabs. That's
right. I think so, because all these big houses we're listing here, the Rowans, the Tarleys, the Red Wines, and of course the Tyrells, are the major houses of the Reach.
Right.
And so if they do something else, then Stannis' bid falters, or at least it's definitely undermined.
Yeah.
And especially if they call on the whatever Reach Lords did pledge to Stannis to break that and come back.
Yes, right, yeah. I get what you're saying. Yeah, it's surprising that any Reach Lords would have gone over to Stannis if Loras, when they realized Loras hadn't. Aside from the Florents. The Florents make sense because they've got family ties, but you're the son of your liege lord, the Lord Paramount of your region leaves, you'd think you'd follow suit.
Right. So for me, there were only ever two choices. I mean, again, Loras is acting on impulse here, but his lords that have followed him, they had two choices: bend the knee to Stannis, or rally to oppose Stannis in some way. Yeah, now, including the foot soldiers at Bitterbridge, you might build up an army big enough to defeat him. In fact, I think you probably would.
Right.
It would be close, but particularly if you can steal this army from him. Defeat him, end the Baratheon line, and then you've got two choices at that point. You either make peace with the Lannisters, or you oppose them. You say, all right, Mace Tyrell, why don't you claim the Iron Throne?
Sure. Yeah, I get it. Yeah, you had been talking, early on about that you had expected the Tyrells to stay out of it because they're fat and happy and rich, and there was no reason to get involved. But they've kind of been drawn into it one way or another. That there's not a lot of options of going back now and just saying, no, we're not getting involved.
Yeah. So
Cersei asks the question. So first Tyrion says, well, not all the lords have gone over. Most have, but not all. And so what we need to do is figure out how to get the Tyrells onto our side. And Cersei says, but is their love for us any greater than it was for Renly? And is it, the implication is also, is it any greater than it would be for Stannis? And Varys mentions the red wines and Stannis had beef over the siege of Storm's End. And of course, we also know the Tyrells were the other major party in that siege. So,
well, to be fair, the Tyrells and the red wines had beef.
They did. Shoe leather.
Stannis had shoe leather.
And onions. Thanks to Davos, they had some onions. But you got to figure that, Stannis is not the kind of guy who's going to court the Tyrells. He's not going to do what the Lannisters are willing to do, which is send an emissary to, work out negotiations with the Tyrells.
But I will say, actually, this reputation, which everyone agrees on, Stannis is not compromising and unforgiving. He's just forgiven 80% of the lords who bent the knee when Renly was murdered.
He has.
They were in open rebellion against him.
But they bent the knee at the time. The Tyrell in the camp left, and I don't see Stannis as the kind of guy who's going to go pursue them and say, please come to my side. What can we do to work out a deal here? He's going to say, like he's been all along, I'm the true king. I expect you to back me. And I think that is because of that nature, the fact that the Tyrells didn't bend the knee immediately and left, and Stannis' nature, it's unlikely to have a quick partnership or a happy partnership here if they don't turn around and come back. If Mace Tyrell doesn't stick his finger out at Loras and say, get back there and bend the knee to that man.
Right. But then that begs the question, was there actually a little bit more thought in this from Loras? Or perhaps the thought was already in place from Mace Tyrell earlier? What I'm thinking is, when Loras joined forces with Renly, Mace Tyrell took him aside and said, listen, don't forget the Siege of Storm's End. The one outcome that we cannot have from this is that we pledge our allegiance to Stannis.
Oh, right.
No matter what happens here, we do not pledge our allegiance to Stannis. And so maybe Loras was not just acting on impulse, but maybe it was like, we're not doing that. That's no matter the rightness of his claim, we will not choose that because of this unending beef between them.
Right. Of course, it's more of Stannis. You'd think it'd be more of Stannis' beef with the Tyrells and Red Ones than the other way around. They were just doing what they were told by the king.
But his unforgiving nature,
right?
I don't think
they
Mace
don't
Tyrell
want him on the throne.
Exactly. I don't think Mace Tyrell is saying, I can't forgive Stannis for eating that shoe leather. I think what he's saying is, that guy can't be king because he's never going to forgive me for eating beef.
Right. That's true. And if we look at our history lessons, the Florents were once a very powerful house in the Reach, and it wasn't until Aegon the Conqueror upjumped the Tyrells to Lord Paramount of the Reach that the Tyrells became so powerful. So, maybe King Stannis gets on the throne, and he reverses that, and he puts the Florents back in a more primary position.
And then again, you see, you go from sort of like were the Florents simply saying, look, our daughter is going to be queen if we side with Stannis. We're going to side with Stannis too. This is our chance to get back to our previous position.
Right. Yes, that's true. There is more at stake than just backing Selyse and her husband.
So the plan to wed Margaery to Joffrey is pretty sensible.
Yeah.
I mean, it's a good idea for everyone except Margaery.
Right. Yes. So that's the part that that we're glossing over. Aside from all the 50,000 swords and everything that comes with the Reach, getting the Tyrells on board, there's also an upside for Sansa because regardless of what she tells Tyrion about how she loves Joffrey and just wants to be loyal to Joffrey, we know better. She is not no longer a fan of of our Joffrey Baratheon. So, and Tyrion told her last chapter he did not plan on having her marry Joffrey any longer, and she refused to comment on whether that would please her or not. So,
Yeah.
But we know that it would.
It's interesting to think how Joffrey might treat Margaery. Margaery's still a young girl too, but she is like 3 or 4 years older than Joffrey. So he might be a little bit more respectful to her.
Yes, it's possible. You got to wonder. We met her very briefly when Kat saw her in the chapter where she first ran into Renly at, I guess that was Cat 2 or so. I'm not sure. Anyway, where she ran into Renly having the tournament. We very briefly met Margaery in that chapter, and she seemed quiet and demure. She wasn't talking at dinner. Loras and Renly were chatting, and she was just sitting there quietly. So we don't know much about her, but if she is quiet and demure and doesn't have a very big outgoing personality, you wonder if Joff might try to take advantage of that and dominate her, or she's older, she's not a hostage like Sansa is, so would she be better equipped to handle Joffrey, keep him in his place?
Doesn't have reason to hate Joffrey, so that can only help a relationship, not having a reason to hate the other person.
Yes, it does. They're not even married yet.
But the weird part of this whole discussion is that Cersei objects to the marriage to Tyrell. She says Joffrey's betrothed to Sansa, but that doesn't make any sense. I mean, like this prolonged betrothal to someone they're never planning for Joffrey to marry has always seemed a bit strange to me.
Yeah, I've thought about it a lot because I had the same thought when I was reading the chapters. Why is she so hung up on this? And my first thought was maybe it's due to her lack of love for the Starks. I mean, she doesn't seem to have any affection for Sansa. It's not like she's like, well, she's such a sweet girl. I want to mentor her and raise her in my image. So maybe she secretly kind of enjoys Joffrey tormenting Sansa for the whole Ned and the Starks beef, and Ned outing her for the incest and all that. Or maybe it's not about Sansa at all. Maybe she got wind of Renly's plan to replace her with Margaery Tyrell.
Oh, that's right, to marry Margaery to Robert.
Right, and so she doesn't want Margaery anywhere around. Maybe if it was some other person, she would be like, yeah, okay, we can do this. Maybe she just doesn't want Margaery around, because Margaery would be the new queen when she marries Joffrey. Queen Cersei is now the Dowager Queen. She's
right, yeah.
So maybe she just doesn't care for Margaery if she got wind of that plan.
I will say, I mean, I think probably in Cersei's mind, the idea of still being betrothed to Joffrey, maybe in Cersei's mind, acts as a sort of palliative to Sansa, that she feels better about her captivity. If she was no longer betrothed to Joffrey, she would just be a prisoner.
Right, that's true, yeah.
As it is, she's being kept there, groomed for being queen. But again, she doesn't care about Sansa enough to care about what Sansa feels about her captivity.
Right.
So that one doesn't seem to hold water. But I also think that there's a little bit of this is she's a little bit afraid for her son. I mean, he is young to be betrothed to a girl 4 or 5 years older than him. And sure. I think being betrothed to a child of the same age, where they simply can't get married yet, there's no reason for them to get married, pushes his becoming a grown-up into the future. And she's a helicopter mom and does not want him to grow up too quickly.
Yeah, all that makes sense. Yeah, him being betrothed to Margaery, they could get married much sooner, right? They get married right away. I mean, Sansa's 12 years old.
And she loses her baby, to a certain extent.
And she loses, she still will be the regent, the queen regent, until Joff comes of age, but they could start a family, and she could be pushed further and further out of the picture.
I thought this belonged in pedantry at first, but the more we talked about it, the more I thought, well, there may be psychological reasons why Cersei is objecting to something which is obviously the right move.
Yes.
So I'll let it slide.
What we need is to get Dr. Honda on here and have him analyze Cersei's issues with this situation. But so we also learned that Cersei was told about the situation with Joff and Sansa in the yard from the last Sansa chapter, because Tyrion, they're debating whether Joffrey has sexual feelings and urges yet. And Tyrion says, well, he did have Ser Boris rip Sansa's gown off. And her response is that's because he was angry with her. And I just wonder if she got an accurate recounting of the scene, because she doesn't seem... I mean, the conversation was not about how right or wrong Joffrey was to be angry with Sansa and treat her the way that he did. But she didn't seem all that broken up about it here. She was not very remorseful, so okay. I just wonder...
Couple of points here. One, if she'd witnessed the scene, she wouldn't have cared. Joffrey can do no wrong, and she's as rotten as he is.
Yeah,
but unless she heard the scene from Tyrion, she heard it from any other human being, she would not have heard an accurate recounting of the scene.
Sure,
she would have heard a very tailored recounting of the scene, making her son look awesome and Sansa look rotten.
That is very possible. I did have that thought as well. Yeah, because what held Joffrey up was Tyrion threatening to go get his mom.
Oh, that is right. He did do that. So yes, maybe.
So,
but again, you know what? I think that would have backfired on Tyrion. I mean, it's a great threat to throw at a child.
Right.
But I think it actually would have backfired, because I think Cersei would have backed Joffrey up. Probably.
Especially in public like that. That's why I wondered if maybe in private she was more angry with him, but now is putting on a less angry face.
But honestly, even as his mother, I don't think you can get angry with this lunatic.
She didn't even get all that angry about him having Ned beheaded. You know?
Right. She was disappointed.
Yeah. Well, so in the last Sansa chapter, I'd questioned if Joff ripping Sansa's gown off was for humiliation purposes or if it was a sexual thing. And in this chapter, Tyrion seems to think it was a sexual thing. And in fact, he thought so much that it was a sexual thing that he and Varys had this secret plan to possibly get to get Joffrey into Chataya's brothel. And first of all, I thought, is it a good idea to use the same brothel that Tyrion uses as his ruse to go visit Shay? I mean, you know, like, the less people you have snooping around that brothel, the better you're better off you are. But yeah, that's just one thing I had thought. But the other thing was Tyrion seems hell-bent on getting Joff away from the Hound in order to do this. And I wondered why.
Why? That is strange, because it's not like the Hound would object. It feels like actually it's a perfect person to accompany the young king to the brothel.
Yes,
is
right.
The Hound.
He probably would agree that it's a good idea. He knows Joff. He'd be like, "Oh, I could see it's worth a try."
But maybe it goes to the other thing. Maybe he has a little bit of respect for Clegane and thinks, I don't want Clegane to know about Chataya's. I don't care if the king knows about it, but...
Oh, yeah. You don't want Clegane snooping around Chataya's brothel and discovering what's really going on there.
The king's only going to discover one thing at Chataya's brothel. Clegane might discover some secrets.
Yeah, I wonder if maybe because the Cleganes are bannermen to the Lannisters, that he might think that the Hound would feel compelled to mention it to Cersei or Tywin. It's not like the other king. He wasn't as focused on the other king's guard, and they're much more in Cersei's pocket. So, and less trustworthy. So anyway, I didn't understand the obsession with making sure the Hound wasn't involved. Yeah. But Then kind of a hot potato situation ensues regarding who should go treat with the Tyrells. As you mentioned in the summary, Cersei immediately tries to turn it to her advantage and send Jacelyn Bywater, which would, Jacelyn Bywater is the commander of the Gold Cloaks, who she knows is Tyrion's man. And, he shoots that down, saying, no, we can't send someone who can only say our words and come back to us with a response. We need someone who can actually negotiate this. Time is of the essence. So she says, how about you, Tyrion? And then she flatters him and says that you wield words as skillfully as Jaime wields a sword. So, and he fires back, yeah, but don't mothers usually arrange their sons' weddings?
Yeah. But Littlefinger sort of cuts through this mess and suggests he be the one to go. And his reason is pretty solid. He's high enough in court to be taken seriously and to be able to actually negotiate. But he's not really at risk of being taken hostage if the Tyrells refuse. Well, I'd say there is a danger of him being taken hostage. It's just there's a lot less danger of anyone paying for him to be released from this.
Which then lessens his value as a hostage. So.
Exactly. I mean, he's just a mouth to feed at that point.
Right.
You realize nobody cares for him.
The way this army has probably been eating through the Reach as they march up the road here. Probably best to have one less mouth to feed. But Tyrion doesn't want... His fear is he doesn't trust Littlefinger, and he doesn't want him out of his sight, which seems to mean that his plan to send Littlefinger to the Eyrie was just a ruse to see if Littlefinger told Cersei about it. When he wanted to send Littlefinger to Lysa to try and get the Vale men, the Knights of the Vale, on board.
Yeah, that's why I still find that whole thing to be puzzling, because basically Tyrion concocted 3 different plans and put those 3 different plans in motion into the hands of Pycelle, Baelish, and Varys.
Right.
And waited to see which one reached Cersei's ears. Yeah. And then he went ahead and did that plan. Was he going to do the other plans if they'd reached Cersei's ears? It feels very strange to me. Because the one plan that's being enacted, which is Myrcella being shipped off to Dorne to act as a hostage ward and future wife,
right,
makes the most sense. The other 2 were a bit weird, to be honest.
They were.
So,
yeah, and also that is quite the thing to offer as a ruse, to offer to be not only have Harrenhal as your seat, but be Lord Paramount of the Riverlands as a fake offer. I mean, you'd have to think that Littlefinger might have some resentment toward Tyrion if when he discovered, that was fake. I wasn't really being offered that.
If I was Tyrion, I would have been. If I was Littlefinger, I would have been skeptical from the get-go. I'd have been like, okay. Every time you offer that to someone, they get shipped off somewhere.
Which is exactly what he was thinking. Is I recall Jaina Slint being offered this same thing here. So yeah. So I guess, but then when Littlefinger says, I assume when I've successfully brokered this agreement with the Tyrells that I will be justly rewarded by the king. And Cersei says, what do you want? And he gives a sly smile to Tyrion and says, I'll have to think on that. You wonder.
He's such a grifter.
I want what was offered me in the first place.
So the plan is to go to Bitterbridge, but Loras is not Mace. If it goes well with Loras, do they have to go to Highgarden to confirm the plan with Mace Tyrell?
Yeah, you can't imagine that Loras could negotiate that. He's the youngest son.
Right, unless, going back to what I was saying before, Mace Tyrell said, here's my pecking order. Renly top, anyone else in between, Stannis bottom.
Maybe.
Right.
Yes. There's
in which case, Loras could go, sure, let's do this.
Yeah, I did find it odd that, he was going to Bitterbridge instead of all the way to Highgarden. I know it's closer, it's significantly closer, but still, I see meet originally with Loras. I could see that. He's the closest, and he's...
And Margaery. I mean, that's the other thing. I mean, Margaery is not an entirely passive participant in this, and it might be interesting. Certainly, the TV show focused a little bit on what Margaery's motivations were at this point. We don't get it in the book as much, but they certainly were like asking her if she wanted to marry Joffrey.
Oh, she got her own opinion on
they
this.
Were curious.
Wow, how progressive.
Had she said no, I don't think they would have listened. But so the only other part to consider is the red wine twins, Horace and Hobber, who are being held to keep the red wines in check. And they come up with the right sort of compromise solution. Keep one, so you've still got the thumb on their neck, but send one back. And just to mention here that I hadn't noticed this before, but the red wine twins' mother is a Tyrell, Mina Tyrell, who is sister to Mace Tyrell, and therefore the twins are first cousins to Margaery and Loras. So that's a good gesture to bring one of them back at least.
Yeah, and it actually even goes further, because Mace and Mina's mother, Olenna Tyrell, was Olenna Redwine before she married Luther Tyrell. Right. So the Tyrells and the Redwines are very much entwined.
Yeah. Littlefinger asks for a documentation that expresses his authority to treat with them, and includes the words "any other arrangements required," which is
right.
Nice.
Yes,
that's what I want in my contract.
Yeah, that makes Tyrion squirm a little bit, and I agree with him. It is a little bit risky to trust Littlefinger with that much unchecked power. We know he frequently told Ned, "Don't trust me." So, he's definitely not the most trustworthy guy. Is it possible he could cut himself some sort of side deal and not mention it to the Lannisters? Yeah. But they don't have a lot of choice, because neither Cersei nor Tyrion want to leave the other unchecked in King's Landing, because Tyrion thinks, I would go. He probably should go. He'd probably be the best suited to go. But if he leaves, everything he's worked for in King's Landing will be torn down.
And the thought of him becoming a hostage is much more serious,
Oh, yes, right. Yeah. If by chance, and I guess what that means is, if by chance the Tyrells don't bite on this Lannister wedding pact, marriage pact, that they could be taken as, Tyrion could be taken as a hostage, and then the Tyrells back Stannis or Robb, and we've got another issue here.
So the small council breaks up, and Cersei and Tyrion leave together. Cersei asks how the chain is coming. Last we heard about the chain, the Smiths had been taken from their task of making weapons and armor for defense of the city at Cersei's request to make the chain instead. This must have been explained to her at some point, because she seems okay with it. Didn't seem to fight him on the change of plans, unless in fact she has told them to get back to making swords and armor. And she's just rubbing it in his face that his chain is not improving.
Right, the two of them are not always directly upfront with each other when it comes to what their plans are. So it's very possible she could have just been asking, knowing full well she's taken them off that task, pretending that she hasn't. But then it gets really weird. The last paragraph of the chapter gets really weird, where she mysteriously apologizes for her behavior toward Tyrion, says she's misjudged him, and that he's actually been a great help to her, and then kisses him. And Tyrion and Bronn and all of us readers are like, what is happening here? But Tyrion's not dumb. He knows something's up. But the question is what?
Yeah, she's up to something. All right, you got some background for us.
I do have a little bit of background. It wasn't a whole lot to go on here in this chapter. And you and I have a different pronunciation for this last name. You've been saying Emin Qui, and in my head I've been calling him Emin Kai. So I'm not sure.
Or something else.
Yes. But so Varys tells us that Emin Kai, or Qui, who was Emin the Yellow in Renly's Rainbow Guard, was killed by Ser Loras in his fit of rage when he found out about Renly being killed. But since that's the last we'll hear of poor Sir Emin, I thought I'd take a real quick here talk about House Kai. Now, the seat of House Kai is Sunhouse Castle in the Reach, although, oddly, in A Feast for Crow's Appendix, it's called Sunflower Hall. So A Land of Ice and Fire calls it Sun House, and A Feast for Crows calls it Sunflower Hall. So I guess take a pick there. Anyway, House Kai is sworn to the High Towers of Old Town, which is one house we haven't mentioned a lot yet from the Reach. They're a very powerful house in the Reach, and they weren't mentioned in this chapter as who they were backing. So anyway, there's actually a town named Kai that sits outside of the walls of Sun House Castle. And the castle and town sit along the coast on the southeast of Old Town. It is very far south. It's actually about even latitudinally with Sunspear and Dorne. So it is way down there. It's actually separated from Dorne by the delta formed where the Torrentine River flows into the Summer Sea. Now, House Kai traces its ancestry back to the Andal adventurers who were given lands and wives by the Gardener Kings, known as the Three Sage Kings, during the coming of the Andals into the Reach.
Were the Gardener Kings wise, or did they grow sage?
They were wise, I believe.
Okay, wise, I see. Okay.
Or at least they were said to be wise. But neither House Kai's arms nor words appear in text, but according to semi-canon sources, they blazon their shields with 6 yellow flowers in an upside-down pyramid kind of thing where there's like 3 on top, 2 in the middle, and 1 on the bottom on a blue background. And the current lord is Branston Kai, and it's unclear how Emmon was related to Lord Branston.
Well, thank you for that. Comparison with the television show. In a slightly odd version of events, Littlefinger is already with the Tyrells before Tyrion hears of Renly's death. In fact, I was a bit confused as to why.
Yeah.
Turns out he actually met with Renly before Renly was killed. He was entreating with Renly before his death for Littlefinger to keep his position and life should Renly assume the throne.
Oh, he's cutting a side deal there.
Right, cutting. Well, but it feels like he's only there to cut the side deal. There doesn't seem to be any official reason for him to be there other than his own.
Why would
behest.
he be?
Right.
Like the Lannisters, what official business would he be on for the Lannisters?
Right. He even offered to ensure that the gates of King's Landing were open to welcome Renly if Renly were.
Yeah, that sounds like a side deal. Yeah.
Then Littlefinger had a long conversation with Margaery again before Renly's death. She had a long conversation with Margaery about whether her marriage had been consummated, all kinds of things. So back to the now of this chapter. Loras is crying over the entirely not missing body of Renly. And Littlefinger and Margaery are in the room too. Loras wants to fight Stannis here and now. So they're still in the camp where Renly was killed.
Right.
But Littlefinger and Margaery talk him into fleeing to Highgarden. When Loras leaves, Littlefinger and Margaery are left alone again. And she mentions, being she was married to a king, but he just claimed to be a king. It doesn't make you a king.
Right.
And Littlefinger said, well, do you want to be a queen? And she said, no, I want to be the queen.
Oh.
So she's quite ambitious.
Right.
She's quite ambitious in the TV show. The news of Renly's death back in King's Landing is just a conversation between Tyrion and Cersei. And as in the book, she's withholding something from Tyrion, and we can't figure out quite what it is.
Okay.
The Red Wine twins and everything that they represent are just dropped from the TV show, as are the other lords loyal to Loras and Renly rather than to Stannis. That's not mentioned at all either.
Okay.
Basically, I think it's just like everyone's gone over to Stannis.
Right.
Apart from Loras, basically. It looks like just him and Margaery are the ones going to flee. And presumably leaving Renly's corpse where it is.
Right. Major departure there from the book.
So pedantry corner, I mean, again, there's some things you can mention in pedantry, but they're all decisions. Like the whole Penrose not opening the doors of Storm's End to Stannis just seems a bit weird. But I guess people do weird things, so
right, yeah.
And I really wanted to say that Cersei not giving up on the idea of Joffrey marrying Sansa, but the more we talked about it, the more I felt, well, maybe she's just being a protective mom.
Yeah, there's some points. Not a great deal of good points, but there's enough points you can make that it makes some level of sense, I guess.
News and notes.
News and notes. Well, so it was a little bit of a light news week, but I did find out that Game of Thrones fans, the TV show, fans of the show, will feel right at home, at least in some scenes, in the upcoming HBO's House of the Dragon. HBO will be filming some scenes in the Game of Thrones prequel in Caceres, Spain. Now, the town was used to film scenes in both King's Landing and Old Town for A Game of Thrones. And considering that there are characters that we know will be featured in the show that are from both locations, they could be filming either or setting. So, but the filming in Caceres is expected to take place October 10th through the 21st, and will be shot at several locations in the city's historic center.
I have to admit, Mackelly, you've let me down there. I was so looking forward to you butchering the pronunciation of Caceres so badly that I would snort derision, but you actually did okay. I think Spanish is not exactly my native tongue.
Yeah, mine either. So I hope I got close enough anyway.
So we got a lovely review on podchaser.com from Genevieve.
We do have a good one. I was very excited when I came across this review.
Yeah.
Say the name again, just in case I talked over it.
Genevieve Kisaka.
Okay.
Great name.
Came from
I just finished
podchaser.com.
Podchaser.com, yeah. I just finished a rewatch of the Harry Potter series and was looking to find a nice new series to fill the void in my heart. Paging Doctors Mackelly and Simon. I tried out A Song of Ice and Fire podcast before discovering The Ghost of Harrenhal, and I'm hooked. I love the chapter-by-chapter analysis. Even though I've read all the books and watched the TV series, Simon and Mackelly still produce tidbits of really interesting background and historical information. Love the deep dives into the universe's backstory and discussions of George Martin's masterpiece. All episodes are fairly spoiler-free, apart from when Simon messes up, and are fun and easy to listen to. A+ podcast.
Woo, that is great. Thank you so much.
Awesome.
Genevieve.
Yes.
That is a fantastic review.
Yeah. All right. Let's draw this one to an end. So Kat's assumption was not quite right. Stannis did not inherit all of Renly's force.
Yeah. It seemed like he got a pretty hefty chunk, 4/5 according to Varys, but it still seems a bit unclear of who has gone onto whom's side here.
Right.
We know several. We know that several of the big houses of the Reach did not come to Stannis' side, but that's about all we know at this point. And we know that the Florents have gone to Stannis' side.
Yeah.
After that, it gets very fuzzy.
Yeah, but if the Lannisters can flip the Tyrells, then you've got to imagine most of the Reach will come back. It's hard to imagine many of them going against Loras, with the one exception of the Florents.
Yeah, right, yeah. Which is really tough for the Florents. If the Tyrells right now are neutral, they have no allegiance to anybody, as they've lost their allegiance
right
to
this second,
Renly.
yes.
So that now they decide to back the Lannisters, and the Florents are like, oh shoot, we just backed Stannis. But if the Lannisters do manage to land the Tyrells, that is a big feather in their cap. That swings the balance of the war possibly again, giving them possibly the biggest troop presence, depending on how things fall out here.
Yeah. So the plan to marry Margaery to Joffrey does seem to be the way to make this happen, and certainly better than the farcical Sansa betrothal. So does this mean anything for Sansa's fate if this comes to pass? I mean, obviously she would now be on the outs, but I mean, she's always been a political prisoner.
Right. I just wonder if Joffrey will be harder on her, if that's even possible, or maybe will he lose interest in her at all because she's no longer his new shiny toy to play with.
She can hope for that, yeah.
Yeah. So now Jaime's captivity should keep her alive as long as Jaime's alive. Sansa should be alive, you'd think. Yeah. So, but
the brokering of this deal could flounder if Joffrey's reputation has reached the Tyrell's ears.
Right.
Loras was in King's Landing, must know a little bit about him.
Yes. So, yeah, it boils down to, do the Tyrells want to hitch Margaery to that wagon?
Yeah.
Now, for political reasons, it could certainly make a lot of sense, but from a personal level, they might decide, no, we're not marrying you to that monster if they have any kind of inkling of the type of person that he is.
Yeah.
But and then we get to the whole Stannis thinks that Tyrion thinks that Stannis will stay in Storm's End until the castle yields. I'm not sure I entirely agree with that. We've talked about it several times in this chapter.
There is the general principle of not leaving enemies behind you, but they're not really enemies. They're just like friends who don't trust you yet.
Right. Yeah, it just seems like it'd be a nice to have, but it doesn't seem like a requirement.
Yeah.
Take your newfound 4/5. Now, of course, they would have to wait. They mostly just have the lords and the mounted force of the new acquired military that they've gained here. They'd have to get the foot soldiers from Bitterbridge, which could prove to be an issue. Maybe
this is what's going to happen. So Stannis is going to stay camped outside the walls of Storm's End, waiting for the army to arrive from Bitterbridge. The army at Bitterbridge is now marching in the opposite direction, having been brought around to corpse Renly's side.
Yeah, that's true.
And as always, Cersei's plotting something, but we don't know what.
Yeah, she's up to something. Tyrion's aware of it too, which is good. I mean, you'd be surprised if he was like, "Oh, well, that was nice. It's good to see that she's come around to me." So he is aware of it, but we'll have to see what it is, in fact.
As always, you can reach us at ghost.harrenhal@gmail.com and follow us on Twitter at @ghostharrenhal. We're on Facebook, Instagram, YouTube, and Discord.
And if you wouldn't mind, please going out and leaving us a 5-star rate and or a glowing review, such as Guinevere did here today. We would very much appreciate it. And if you do, we might read it on a future episode.
Thanks for listening.
Thanks.
Bye.
Bye.